Hey, old school gamers. Welcome to Grumpy Old GMs. Today, we're going to talk about a cool piece of gaming history. So, D&D, as we know, kind of started in the late 70s and really kind of got rolling more in the early 80s. And there are those of us who were around back then who think that it's not a coincidence that at that time, in the early 80s. Now, these kinds of things change over time. So it's the very end of 2022 as I record this. So it probably changed by now. But in the early 80s, Wisconsin was the number one state in the union for reading comprehension in education. And there are those of us who don't think that's an accident, that these hardback books came out of Wisconsin, Geneva, Wisconsin. TSR was the company, the original company that started Dungeons and Dragons with Gary Gygax and all that. And the books then were very text dense. As one of my friends recently described it when I was showing him an old book from the 80s, and he's like, "Wow, it's very text dense." Also, the vocabulary. So there's a whole generation of gamers who learned words like dexterity from D&D, probably never would have heard that word otherwise, or that learned that the word constitution doesn't just refer to some old document in American history, but it actually refers to your health and the fitness of your body. That there's just all kinds of vocabulary words that I remember picking up at age 13, age 14, right out of D&D. A Puriapt is an amulet or a medallion, like the magical item, the Puriapt of proof against poison. Or speaking of other magic items, a lot of people would refer to books not just as books, but as tomes or librums. Or in terms of, right there in the first edition Dungeon Master's Guide, Gary Gygax would talk about a little bit about world building and world creation. And he would talk about how countries needed a form of government. And so he started listing off and giving little paragraphs to explain briefly how different forms of government would work. And so us kids back then, we learned words like theocracy and aristocracy and plutocracy. And, all of these, there's a social studies lesson about forms of government right there on a page in first edition Dungeon Master's Guide. So cool piece of gaming history that in the early 80s, it was not an accident that these books came out of Wisconsin, because Wisconsin was the number one state in the union for reading comprehension. And if you know of words, and you don't have to be totally old school, you don't have to have been there like I was in the 80s, but if you have learned some words in your vocabulary just from Dungeons and Dragons, put them in the comments section below. I'm sure I could probably think of maybe 50 words I learned from D&D growing up. But welcome. This is our first video with the Grumpy Old GMs brand. Welcome. If you're interested in gaming with me or any of the other Grumpy Old GMs I bring on as guests from time to time, look for our website, grumpyoldgms.com. The link is down below. And if there are any tables open, if there's any, seats at our tables, just look and see. I keep that pretty well updated. As I record this at the end of December 2022, there are quite a few spots open. I'm just kind of getting started again. I did full-time DMing at startplaying.games for almost a year. It was like 10 months. It was like May 2021 to March 2022. And then a real job came along. And it would have been irresponsible of me not to take that real job. But the real job's over. So I am back to full-time DMing. So I am going to be available, and if you want to see if there's any open spots, just check us out, grumpyoldgms.com. And we will see you around the gaming table.